The night the city held its breath, Daniel Harper slept without dreams. From the balcony of a penthouse, glowing above the river, the lights looked like stars he could buy and sell, and the quiet felt earned. He had signed papers that afternoon that would ripple through markets by morning. He had kissed a woman who was not his wife, murmuring promises he did not plan to keep. And while the city hummed below, a child across town struggled for air, counting seconds that felt like years. Daniel had not always been a man who slept through storms. Once, long before his name carried weight, he had woken at every sound, alert to the way life could turn on a whisper. But years of comfort had padded his senses. He lay between silk sheets, breathing evenly, his phone face down on the nightstand, its glow muted like a conscience placed on silent. Across town, in a hospital room where the walls were a tired blue, Sofia Alvarez pressed her forehead to the glass of an incubator. Her daughter, Lucia, was small enough to fit in her forearms, like a question mark. Tubes traced gentle arcs across her face. Machines murmured like prayers learned by heart. Sofia had learned to read those sounds the way sailors read stars. Tonight, the rhythm faltered. Sofia had not planned for motherhood to begin this way. She had not planned for love to end in silence, for phone calls unanswered, for the words, "I'll take care of it," to dissolve into nothing. She had told Daniel about the baby, when her hands still shook with hope. He had listened, his eyes steady, his voice careful. He had said the right things and done very little. She had told herself she didn't need him. She had told herself she could be enough. Her father, Miguel Alvarez, stood by the door with his cap in his hands, turning it over and over like a rosary. Miguel had been a mechanic his whole life. The kind of man who fixed things not because they were broken, but because they might break someday. He believed in tightening bolts before they loosened. He believed in showing up early. He believed in promises kept with hands, not words. Miguel had met Daniel once, briefly, at a charity gala where the room smelled of polished wood and ambition. Daniel had shaken his hand with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Miguel had watched the way Daniel spoke to people, how his attention skimmed rather than landed. He had felt a chill then, a premonition he could not name. Tonight, the chill sharpened into something like resolve. The nurse came quietly, her shoes whispering on linoleum. She adjusted a dial, frowned, adjusted it again. Sofia watched the numbers flicker, each change a tug at her heart. Miguel stepped closer, placing a steady hand on his daughter's shoulder. He did not say everything would be okay. He had learned not to lie to the people he loved. When Lucia's breathing slowed, time seemed to fold in on itself. The machine's murmurs thinned, stretched, and then there was a sound like a door closing gently, so gently that only those listening for it would hear. Sofia's breath caught. The nurse's face softened in that practiced way that tells the truth without words. Miguel felt the world tilt. He had buried friends and parents, had watched life leave bodies like a tide receding. But this was different. This was a future collapsing before it had a chance to stand. He held his daughter as she cried, her tears soaking his shirt, her grief raw and wordless. He closed his eyes and made a promise, not to God or fate, but to Lucia herself. Revenge is often imagined as fire. Miguel's did not burn. It hardened. The days that followed blurred into arrangements and paperwork, and the unbearable quiet of a nursery that would never be used. Sophia moved like someone underwater. Every sound muffled, every motion delayed. Miguel cooked meals that went untouched, folded blankets that stayed folded. He waited for the anger to explode, but it did not. It settled into him like a stone he learned to carry. Daniel sent a message 2 days after Lucia died. It was brief, formal, a condolences-shaped object that did not quite fit. He offered to cover expenses. He offered silence. Sophia stared at the screen until the words lost meaning. Miguel read it once and set the phone down. Miguel did not go to Daniel's building with fists or threats. He did not shout into lobbies or demand apologies. He went to the place where Daniel's world began and ended, the stories he told about himself. Miguel had never cared much for the internet, but he understood engines, and the modern world ran on narratives like engines ran on oil. He spent nights learning, reading about foundations and tax filings and press releases. He spoke to people he had met over decades, teachers, nurses, community organizers, asking what they needed, what was missing, what might change lives quietly if given a chance. He found, in the margins of Daniel's empire, a contradiction. Daniel's company prided itself on innovation and impact. It sponsored galas and printed glossy reports about social responsibility. It loved stories with clean endings. Miguel decided to give it one it could not ignore. Miguel sold his old truck, the one he had rebuilt twice with his own hands. He took the money and matched it with small donations from neighbors who trusted him. He founded a fund in Lucia's name, dedicated to neonatal care in underfunded hospitals. He did not ask Daniel for money. He did not ask permission. Miguel wrote letters, not accusations, not pleas, to board members and journalists and hospital administrators. He told a simple story of a child who needed care and a system that did its best with too little. He did not name Daniel. He did not have to. The connections made themselves. The first article appeared quietly, a human interest piece about a grandfather turning grief into help. It mentioned a fund and a name. It mentioned a hospital wing that would be upgraded. It mentioned a CEO whose company's philanthropy had yet to address the gap. The comments were kind. The shares multiplied. Daniel noticed when a colleague forwarded the article with a question mark. He read it quickly, irritation flaring at the implication. He told his assistant to prepare a donation, something respectable, something that would close the loop. He did not read the name of the child twice. Miguel declined the donation. He did so politely, publicly, with a letter that thanked the company for its interest and explained that the fund sought partners committed to sustained, transparent support, not one-time gestures. He invited the company to visit the hospitals, to listen to staff, to understand needs beyond a headline. The refusal made waves. It did not accuse, but it challenged. It forced a conversation Daniel could not control. Board members asked questions. Investors asked others. The story grew. Daniel went to the hospital wing on a gray morning, annoyed at the inconvenience. He expected photo ops and handshakes. Instead, he was met by a nurse who spoke plainly about shortages and shifts that stretched too long. He watched a father rock a baby whose skin was nearly translucent. He felt something stir, uncomfortable and unfamiliar. Miguel was there, not as a gatekeeper, but as a guide. He did not recognize Daniel at first, or pretended not to. When they were introduced, Miguel's eyes were steady, his handshake firm. "Thank you for coming," he said, as if Daniel were a guest, not a debtor. They walked together past incubators. Miguel spoke of mechanics and maintenance, of how small fixes could prevent catastrophic failures. He spoke of Lucia, briefly, without bitterness. Daniel listened, his defenses eroding not from attack, but from exposure. The world Miguel described did not fit into quarterly reports. When Daniel realized who Miguel was, the ground shifted again. He stammered, offered apologies that sounded thin even to his own ears. Miguel did not accept or reject them. He nodded and kept walking. The climax came not with a confrontation, but with a choice. Miguel announced that the fund would partner with Daniel's company if the company agreed to a set of terms written by hospital staff and parents, not executives. The terms included long-term commitments, open audits, and leadership training that required executives to spend time on hospital floors each year. The press waited for Daniel to refuse, to negotiate, to spin. Daniel surprised them. He agreed. He stood beside Miguel and spoke, not of generosity, but of accountability. He acknowledged failures without detailing personal ones. He promised change measured not in dollars, but in outcomes. Behind the scenes, Daniel did something else. He ended the affair. He began divorce proceedings honestly. He met Sophia once, privately, to apologize without expectation. He listened as she spoke of Lucia, of dreams that would never unfold. He did not interrupt. He did not defend himself. He left with nothing resolved and something finally begun. The impact of the partnership was immediate and slow, a paradox Miguel understood well. Machines were upgraded, staffing improved, training expanded. Over time, survival rates edged upward. Parents slept a little easier. Nurses stayed a little longer. Miguel continued to show up. He fixed chairs in waiting rooms. He learned the names of night shift staff. He told Lucia's story when asked, and kept it close when not. Sophia found her footing again, returning to work, volunteering with the fund, discovering that her grief could coexist with purpose. Daniel changed, not into a saint, but into a man who slept less soundly and woke more often. He learned to sit with discomfort. He learned that mercy could be merciless in its demand for truth. He learned that compassion, once unleashed, did not end neatly. Years later, a plaque was installed in the hospital wing. It bore Lucia's name and a simple line about love turned outward. Daniel attended the unveiling, standing at the back. Miguel stood at the front, his cap in his hands. When he spoke, his voice was calm. "We don't honor the dead by hurting the living," he said. "We honor them by making the living safer, kinder, and more seen." The room was quiet, then filled with applause that felt like rain after a long drought. Miguel felt the stone in his chest lighten, not disappear, but shift into something he could carry without pain. That night, Daniel went home alone. He lay in bed and did not sleep for a while. He thought of a child he would never know, and a man who had taught him the hardest lesson of his life. When sleep came, it was shallow, but it was honest. In the years that followed, stories multiplied, of babies who grew, of parents who breathed easier, of executives who learned to listen. None of them erased the loss that began it all, but together they formed something like redemption, not for one man, but for many. And somewhere, in the quiet spaces between machines and prayers, kindness did its quiet work, proving that the most merciless revenge against indifference is compassion that refuses to look away.